most therapists do not have a shared past life in common with the client they're working with. And interestingly, all three of my books have been about that exact scenario.
My guest is Wendy Rose Williams. I want to start with the near-death experience because I think that really triggered the things that are going on throughout the rest of your life. I think it's really compelling. So could you start with that experience and then go forward with the books and the things that you're doing now?
Absolutely, Wendy. So what happened was it was August of 1997. I was newly pregnant, very excited to be pregnant for the second time. And I had an incredible near-death experience at home alone. So fortunate because what happened was the fundus burst at the top of my uterus, and that's an aorta. And of course, I had no way of knowing that at the time. I just had this incredible searing pain, and I had run into the bathroom thinking something's terribly wrong. I'm going to be sick. And I had called out to God for help. And when I came to, because I was unconscious, and I do not think I would have made it, except there was this insistent male voice, and he kept saying, Wendy, you've got to wake up now or you're going to go home. And my bathroom was filled with 4 or 5 angels. I was 36 years old at the time. I was a casual Christian. I believed in God. I believed in Jesus as his son and as this incredible healer who had walked the earth. But I really was not on a spiritual path. I didn't know about near-death experiences. So this was really coming out of the blue. And when the angel kept repeating that to me so urgently, and I'm trying to get oriented because I'm laying on my side, just curled up in a fetal position with all this pain in my abdomen, when he kept repeating that, my answer was, I understand, but I can't walk. And his answer was so compelling, Wendy. It was on multiple levels. And what he said was, you just have to be willing to try. And I think that was because we live on a free will planet, and no one can come in with this magic wand and do everything for us and, change our life, fix our life, make our life better. We've got to do everything we can to live the life that we're meant to and get through the challenges, because those can be such opening points, and it certainly was for me. So I managed to get up on my hands and knees. And at that point, my belief system is just being blown wide open. I'm trying to take in the fact that angels are real, and I'm talking with one. And it was like, as I got onto my hands and knees, it was like being gently flown to the nearest landline, which was close by. Because again, this is 1997. We don't have a cell phone glued in our hands or glued in the back pocket. And I chose to call my husband because he worked very close to home, and good fortune, everything was working in my favor. I got him on the phone right away. I've never reached him at work like that. And I give him great credit because all I said was, I need you to drive me to the hospital now. Can you take me there now? And all he said was, on my way, and slammed down the phone. So I had just enough time to call the OBGYN office, explain what was happening, answer some questions, and they said that was fabulous that my husband was bringing me because it would be quicker than 911 at that point. And my OB office was located at the hospital, I think was also very important for my survival and for my story. So they tell me, okay, don't park when you get here. We're going to meet you curbside with a wheelchair. We don't want you walking. So that's exactly what happens. I get whisked up to the doctor's office into the ultrasound room, and they help me up on the bed because I can't even get up on the bed myself. And I'm just not seeing anything on the screen, which was mystifying to me. Many of us have had an ultrasound before, and you can see a lot. And I said to the ultrasonographer, "Is that machine on? Is your machine working?" And her reply was, "I'm going to get the doctor now." So, which is not good.
Yeah.
She comes right back with a physician and with a nurse midwife, and I did kind of find that comical, trying to look at 5 people trying to squeeze themselves into this tiny room meant for 2. And the physician adjusts the machine, and he realizes what's happening, and he tells me very kindly but very to the point, Wendy, you've got a major abdominal bleed. This machine is working fine. What's going on is all that black and just everything being grayed out on the screen. That's a huge blood loss. And I can't tell where it's coming from because all I can see is blood. And that's why your abdomen is starting to distend so markedly at this point. It's blood loss. So I get whisked over to the hospital on a stretcher. They don't even want to put me back in the wheelchair. They want me prone at that point, and I get lifted transferred into the hospital bed, and I get admitted bedside. I noticed they put me right next to the nurse's station, and I had worked in healthcare, so I'm picking up on more nuances than most people would. I knew that meant they were really concerned. Mm-hmm. So we're discussing, what do we do? Do we go straight to surgery? And part of that decision was, okay, Wendy, do you know your blood type? I was like, absolutely. Everyone should know their blood type. By the way, there are now free apps called In Case of Emergency, ICE. I believe everyone should know their blood type and put this free app on your phone. If you're ever in a situation where you're in an accident, you can't talk or think clearly for yourself, emergency personnel can bring this up on your phone without knowing your phone passcode, put in any allergies to medication and other things in there too. So I told them, okay, I'm A negative, and the nurse is out calling the Puget Sound Blood Bank because we have a central blood bank in the Seattle area to not be wasting this critical resource. She comes back in a few minutes later, not looking happy, while we're still trying to, figure out what to do. And clearly I need transfusions, and we're discussing the possibility of surgery. And she said, I can't get any blood for her because evidently there's no A negatives because there was a train collision a few days ago and the A negative blood supply was wiped out at the regional blood bank. So for various reasons, we make the decision to watch and wait. I was very comfortable with that decision. I'm just trying to visualize this. The body's a miracle, and I'm trying to picture, this blood loss. All I could think was that an organ had burst. That's what it felt like when I went to the ground in the bathroom with that searing pain. It was like, oh my gosh, I think an organ just burst. And I'm trying to list in my head, okay, what are the non-essential organs? Gallbladder?
Non-essentials.
Appendix?
What can I get rid of?
Right. What can I let go of here? So we agreed to wait and watch. And it's also important to know where I was. I was at my community hospital, but it was a hospital I knew well. I trusted implicitly. I'd not only delivered my daughter there because we had an 18-month-old, but I'd gone through infertility treatment there. I'd had 2 ectopic pregnancies treated there and had surgery for those. And because they were delivering about 5,000 babies a year, in Kirkland on Seattle's east side at that time, I knew that meant they had a really deep infrastructure for OB emergencies, et cetera. So brief discussion, did I need to be transferred downtown? And I said, no, thank you. And we all agreed I could be treated well where I was. So we're doing watch and wait. They were able to get blood for me about 6 hours later. So that was a big deal, but I'm in so much pain. I'm like blowing through all the pain relievers. I'm now on morphine, which was not an easy decision because I'm in the first trimester of pregnancy. I'm only 10 weeks pregnant. But there wasn't a choice. I needed transfusions. I needed morphine. So we did watch and wait for about 3 days. And of course, I'm being very closely attended to. And they were taking my hematocrit every day. And on day 3, my doctor says to me, Wendy, you probably know this, but we are at the point where you have to have surgery. You are officially bleeding out. We cannot pump it in. We cannot transfuse quickly enough because you just lose it faster than we can. So clearly there's something going on that needs surgical repair. And by then, Wendy, I looked like I was about 5 or 6 months pregnant, and I wasn't even starting to show. I'm only 10 weeks. Of course, the fetus is this tiny little peanut. So we make the decision to do the surgery. I'm relieved at some level because really hard decision, but I knew there really wasn't any other choice. And I had been feeling myself walking between worlds for those days in the hospital. And what concerned me the most about that was I didn't really care. That is so not my personality. I've always been just, get it done, gung-ho. Okay, plan A didn't work. What's plan B, C, D? We'll find another way. So I knew my life force was really, really ebbing away. So I agreed to the surgery. We're going to do it first thing in the morning, the next day with 2 OBGYN physicians, which I also knew, meant they were really concerned because I'm scheduled for first surgery of the day. And I'm trying to relax in my room that night. I'm by myself in the hospital. I've had the early dinner you get in the hospital, and it's around 5 o'clock, just trying to relax, trying to picture, visualize, feel the best possible outcome. The minute I really do that and have that thought, I pop right out of my body, leave my body, and I'm now feeling so much better. I'm not in pain anymore. I feel more energy starting to come back. And I look over my shoulder and I'm like, oh, look at her. She is a hot mess. She's whiter than the sheets. Her hair looks like this wild woman of Borneo. Because, of course, it's not been brushed or combed in days. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Why am I referring to myself in the third person? So I realize I'm in pure soul form, and I feel fantastic to be out of the body. And I'm like, oh, well, she's fine. I'm not fine at all. The body is not fine at all. But that, the soul being eternal, it just has a really different viewpoint on these things because it knows that it cannot die. So, and it knows the body, although very important in our temple for temporary residence, is just temporary housing. So what I'm interested in the soul form, I want to follow the light because I can see the light. So I follow it up and just pop out through the hospital roof, through my room, out through the hospital, and I'm going faster and faster back up to the light, feeling better and better and better. And then, if you've ever run out of gas, it felt just like that, like I stuttered to a stop, going, oh no, oh no, oh no, I'm out of energy. And I had this thought, oh, please don't make me walk through that long tunnel. I don't think I'll make it. And again, this is 97. We didn't have all these wonderful documentaries and podcasts and books about NDEs and, going home to the light. But evidently I knew something about that. And the minute I have that thought of, I can't walk through this long tunnel, I'm out of energy, this wonderful, pristine escalator drops in for me. I'm so grateful for it. I plop myself on it. I'm the only person on it, the only soul on it. And because I plopped onto the escalator, that made me realize what my body form was. I knew I should have been like a beach ball of all this like sparky energy, a big orb, very lively orb. But instead, I was flatter than a pancake. So I'm just like hanging over the escalator railing for dear life, like a totally flat tire hanging over it. So it takes me up to the light, and I'm like, oh, yay, I made it. There was this incredible welcoming committee for me at the top of the escalator. Clearly they knew I was coming. I could see the same 4 or 5 angels in the back. And my soul family was all in front of them. And this was so thrilling to me. And they all gave me this huge group hug. There were 18 or 20 of them there. They all looked exactly the same, yet I knew who each one was. Everyone has a different soul signature, soul energy. I recognized all 4 grandparents. I recognized one of my best friends, and that I had to think about for a moment because she's very much alive. So I realized it was her higher self energy. And I get this tremendous welcome home. Archangel Michael then begins speaking, and the minute he speaks, I'm like, oh, of course, that's who was helping me and talking to me and saved my life in my bathroom. And what Michael said was, welcome home. You've done nothing wrong. You're welcome to stay, but you're going to need to decide quickly. And I can share 3 things with you. And he told me, number 1, if you choose to go back and have the surgery tomorrow, the surgery will be successful and you will fully regain your health. Number 2, your baby will be born healthy. Now, these are huge things that are making me start to consider going back, because when I first got home to the light and got that hug, Wendy, I could have stayed there forever because it was unconditional love. There was no judgment. There was no pain. There was no worries. It was just the ultimate. So why would I go back? Mm-hmm. So he's giving me this choice and delineating it quite clearly. So now I'm starting to waver a little bit now that I know this really important information that I'm so grateful to know. But number 3 was the kicker. And he said, number 3, if you choose to go back, your life will be very difficult, likely for many years, because you're not living your purpose. You're not on your path. So I'm horrified to hear this. I am just embarrassed. I feel terrible. No one wants to hear they're not living their life purpose. So, of course, I look at him. I'm like, well, what is it? Hello, little enlightenment here. What am I supposed to be doing or not doing or let go of or do more of? And he just gently shook his head. So I felt my heart kind of plummet. Because I was 36 years old. How do I not have a clue yet? And so I was like, well, wait a minute. My whole soul family's here. There's other angels here. Group dynamics. There's going to be a chatty Cathy here in the group. So I start trying to get info from all of them. But no one will tell me anything because they're not supposed to.
Yeah, they're not going to help you cheat.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Exactly. There's a check and a balance to, what we're meant to know. So we don't want to prevent a lesson or progress or learning or slow down any of that. So no one will tell me, my energy starts to plummet again. So I'm like, oh, this is so hard. So everyone gets super funny. And, when I ask them and they won't tell me, they lock up their lips and throw away the key, but in a really, really fun way. So I start laughing, and that makes me realize, oh, it is so true. Laughter is the best medicine. So anything we can do to try and find humor, in things when they're challenging, go watch some favorite comedies, go listen to some uplifting music, and it really does help us raise our vibration and frequency so we can get on through the hard times. So Michael then asks me, what do you want to do? And the second he asked me that, all I can see is my adorable toddler's face. And Tara had this brown curly hair and these huge hazel eyes. And it wasn't like she was life-size in front of me. She filled my world. It was like an IMAX screen that's 70 foot tall, only bigger. It filled top to bottom, side to side. It was all around me. All I can see is my daughter's face. And I know I'm going to regain my health, and I know I'm going to have a healthy baby. And this was a very wanted pregnancy. And after infertility and 2 ectopic pregnancies, I kind of felt like it was my last opportunity. So I tell Michael, put me back in, coach. I'm ready to play, and I'll just have to figure out what the purpose is. I'll just have to figure that part out. so he just smiles, this huge, like really, like impressed with my decision, happy with my decision. And everyone gives me one more group hug. And that time I realized it wasn't just unconditional love like I felt the first time with that welcome home and that support. It was energy. And that download of energy to my flatter than a pancake self was so needed. I don't think I would have survived the surgery the next day without this incredible trip home to the light, back to the divine that just gave me exactly what I needed. So I get this amazing hug, and then Michael puts me back down on the escalator, and I'm just looking over my shoulder, and everyone's in cheerleader mode, and like, you can do it, and we'll be supporting you. I felt so much more connected than I had before. So I did have a successful surgery the next day, and what the physicians discovered was it was the fundus, which is an aorta at the top of the uterus, had ruptured, and they estimated that I had lost 3/4 of my blood supply in that 3 or 4 days from when it happened until we did the surgery, based on all the transfusing they did. So they did the surgery under imaging guidance, being very careful to stay away from that precious pregnancy. And that's what happened with their near-death experience. And it was like my guides told me later, it was like taking a nut to a chisel to a nut, trying to get this really stubborn nut to open. So the near-death experience became really, really important in changing my belief system, just opening it, broadening it, making me understand so much more.
Quick question. You described the angels, and you hadn't expected angels. So how did you identify?
They were huge. They were 7 or 8 foot tall. There was so much light coming off them, so much love, so much wisdom. They did not feel human. I knew immediately they were angels. I couldn't see their faces clearly. They had on these beautiful big robes that had hoods with them, so I couldn't see faces clearly because there just was too much light and love coming off them. And I knew they were angels just because I knew the energy. Also, I could sense their wings and just see how large their wings were. They were like floating in my bathroom 4 or 5 inches off the floor, and I could just sense like the wings curling up there, all the way down past where their feet would be.
You said that the people that you recognized by their energy, but not, they all had the same form of your familiar, your soul group.
Yes, and I wasn't that surprised to see my mom's parents, my maternal grandparents, because I knew them really well, and I had actually lived with them for a couple of years, and they passed on. So, that wasn't a huge surprise. I was so thrilled to reunite with them. But I also immediately recognized my dad's parents. And my paternal grandparents died before I was born in this lifetime. So that was just showing me and reminding me, we always recognize soul family, those beings that we've incarnated with multiple times. And yes, absolutely, everyone looks the same, like these big, wonderful, beach balls with all this sparky energy around inside it. All these artificial divisions we have about race and color and socioeconomic, they amount to a hill of beans. They don't mean a darn thing. And we just need to get over ourselves as the human race, because we're just these beautiful souls. But you just absolutely recognize who they are, like, they were my grandfather this time, and, some of the different roles that they've played.
From there to where you are now, you said at that point you had no clue, you weren't on your path. They told you needed to figure it out. How did you figure it out?
So what happened was things did get very hard, exactly as Michael had told me they would. And I went back to work after 6 weeks of bed rest to regain my health. I get laid off from a job I love that I really depend on and need. And I'm carrying the family health insurance. So this is a big deal. But I can now hear angels. So things have changed pretty profoundly. At that point, I was not hearing them regularly. It's now so many years later. It's wonderful daily conversations with guides and angels and God and whomever I choose to speak with or whoever initiates with me. And then 1 week later to the day after I'm laid off, my husband's software company that he owned with multiple owners had been very successful. They employed 100 people. It goes belly up. So we now have no jobs and I'm pregnant, no insurance. We've just purchased a new, larger home. We've just purchased a minivan. So things did get very hard for quite a while. And then the astrology all shifted. In one weekend, I deliver on March 13th, 1998, and he ends up getting his former companies able to be sold, and he gets back to work on the Monday after. She's born on a Friday. He goes back to work on Monday. So everything's starting to shift. I was able to get health insurance again through some divine intervention of Michael showing me a brochure for a program I had never heard of when I was in the pediatrician's office, and he turned this lamp up so bright I thought it was going to blow up. So I ran over and grabbed the brochure because I could hear him saying, "Look, look." And so I did get approved for a short stay delivery because with all of the complications, birth center at home was certainly not options for me. I'm home, and I had delivered on a Friday night. I'm home on Saturday morning trying to catch my breath, and so grateful to be holding this baby. Anyone is, but particularly with what I had gone through, it was a really big deal. Yeah. So I'm holding our youngest. I'm nursing her. I'm alone in our bedroom. And Michael comes in and just says very conversationally, "Your contract with your husband is complete." I almost dropped the baby. I was just so angry, so horrified. And I thought, well, wait a minute, Wendy, don't jump the gun. Let's see what that actually means. Maybe that doesn't mean what I think it means. And I looked at him. I said, "Are you saying my marriage is over?" And he just nods his head and then he leaves. I'm like, really? You tell me this like 12 hours after delivery? But I knew it was true, Wendy. It wasn't what I had wanted or expected at the human level, but I knew it was true. I just knew in my bones, and it just had been a challenging marriage. I later was able to find the soul contract. I believe that we make agreements with other soul family members of things that we want to work on, and we just form these agreements of what we're going to do together. And I was able to find the contract with my now former husband, and it was to have a long-term marriage that we'd both grow from and have beautiful children together. And I could see the underlined 3 times. So, we just had baby number 2. We've now had beautiful children together. So I chose to stay for 6 years. We did everything we could to be great parents, to be kind and respectful of one another. But that was really hard, knowing that it was complete. But again, a conscious decision. So waited until they were both in school full time, and then we did divorce and went to a shared residential schedule. So my next big awakening would come 6 more years after that. So our daughters were now 12 and 14, and it came in the most ridiculous way possible. I was finally ready 6 years after the divorce, having rebuilt all my life, and the girls are just doing really well. all of a sudden I was like, what's missing? I suddenly feel like something's missing. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh, wow. I would love to meet a wonderful guy. How do you do that? So I asked younger girlfriends who were actively dating and said, hey, how'd you meet your boyfriend? How'd you meet your fiancé? How'd you meet your husband? And one after another said, oh, Wendy, that's easy. You just need to go on Match.com. And I'm like, Match. What? I don't know what you're saying to me, because I didn't know what online dating was. I hadn't been on a date in, 25 years. And it didn't exist back when my husband and I had met. Girlfriends helped me put together a profile. And the minute that I changed the distance, the radius to 10 miles, I was willing to meet someone up to 10 miles away. And the minute I did this, his profile came up and I was looking at it. I'm like, I know him. Where do I know him from? And I was also reading through his profile very carefully on high alert. It's like I could not look away from my computer screen. And I've not had this reaction to anyone else. I've been doing online dating for maybe 3 or 4 months at that point. So something was really changing, really getting my attention. And the last line that he wrote in his Match profile was, any woman on a spiritual journey, particularly one interested in an LBL, we have to meet. So I Google LBL because I'm like, what the heck is that? I have to make sure this isn't some weird drug reference.
Right. Okay. Yeah. What's the code?
So right, because he didn't spell it out. So I find Life Between Lives. I find Past Life Regression. I find Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. This has got to be what he's talking about. Oh my goodness, I cannot wait to read this book. So I'd ordered it immediately from the library. This was 2010, so it's before Kindle instant gratification. And I'm waiting for the book to come from the library. And I fire off a message to him immediately. And I'm like, I am so drawn to your profile. I think we know each other. Are you referring to Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls, and Past Life Regression and Life Between Lives? And he writes back in a nanosecond and says, yes, have you read it? Are you on that path? Have you been for Past Life Regression? Have you been for an LBL? And I'm like, no, but I can't wait for the book to get here from the library. So we can't stop talking. We're like in email, we're on the phone, we're texting, we're trying to sync up schedules. It took us 3 weeks to sync our schedule to meet for lunch on a weekday. And I think it took that long so that I'd have a chance for the book to arrive and to read it. I think that was kind of the universe intervening there. And so I'm waiting in the restaurant for him to walk in. And the minute he does, Wendy, I thought there was an earthquake. I literally felt the earth move, and I could hear my guide say, nothing will ever be the same. And I couldn't stand up. I was sitting on the little bench in the foyer. I had arrived first, and he walked over to me, and he knew me immediately. I knew him immediately, because guess what? People don't always look like their Match photos. And they're using the awesome one from 10 years ago. It's like, please use your current photo. Uh-huh. So I can't even stand up. I am just gobsmacked. And he realizes this, and he just drops down on one knee in front of me, and he's just inches from my face and my eyes, and he's like, I know you. And so he helps me up, and I shake it off. Be normal, Wendy. Mm-hmm. Walk in the restaurant and have lunch. We'll figure this out. So we walk in. We have a 3-hour lunch. It had so much. It was like we could not stop finishing each other's sentences. It had this incredibly exciting feeling of catching up, like you would with just a beloved friend or lover or family member. There was just such excitement to it. And by the end of lunch, we concluded we had never met in this lifetime, but we both said, I know you from past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a big deal for me because that's what got me like fully there, because I hadn't really considered that possibility before, that we could be reincarnating to learn these carefully chosen lessons because our eternal soul just wants to progress. So we dated exclusively for a little over a year, for 13 months. And it was a highest highs, lowest lows, very dramatic, very intense. That's not me. I don't like drama. I love peace. So it just was very unusual. Over the next 8 years, we would find 21 lives together. We'd been married in 6 of them, in all different relationships, because what I've seen again and again and again, not just my personal experience, but clients, and so much reading, is people incarnate into these different roles with each other. You know, might be brother and sister in one lifetime. You might be neighbors in another. Different roles. So we had so much of that to sort through that we just could not maintain the romantic relationship, because it was just too hard on me, and we had an irreconcilable difference. And it broke my heart, honestly, because by then I was starting to be able to really understand soul contracts, and I knew we had some beautiful soul contracts together, one of which was he was to wake me up spiritually, which he certainly did with a bang, with introducing me to Michael Newton, and just him coming into my life in such a big way, and me, realizing that the depths of it. So after we broke up, and we also were meant to help others with their spiritual awakening, because mine was so profound, and clearly he was on the path too. He'd been for multiple past life regressions, and he was getting ready to go for his second life between lives when he met me, which is why he'd put that in his dating profile, hoping to meet anyone else on a similar path, because it's a pretty specific path. So he ends the relationship by email. I am not only heartbroken, I'm ticked off.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, what started online ended online. And I waited a couple of days until I could form words, and contacted him and said, got your email. I agree we should no longer be dating, but I'd really appreciate having a conversation, because I think we have a lot left unsaid that we're still working on. So we did have that conversation. It was one of the best conversations of my life. And we then, over time, became spiritual seekers together, because we also had an amazing contract. And this is part of why the breakup was so heartbreaking, because we had a soul contract. We agreed before we came into this life that we'd meet later in life and marry later in life. He was divorced for the second time. I was 49 when we met. He was 57. And that we were going to have a very happy marriage together, and we're going to help others with their spiritual awakenings by writing about it, by doing public speaking, radio, perhaps television. So I was heartbroken, because it wasn't only this important, what felt critical relationship ending, but I felt like it took a lot of my purpose away, because I really wanted to do that work. And what worked out beautifully, please, anyone listening, do not despair if these major roadblocks, what feels like a roadblock, comes up, because often it's meant to happen. And if it's an important part of your life purpose, it's just gonna rebloom in a different way, because the guides will just be working on a different way. And so what actually ended up happening, I thought it was literal for us to write books together, but instead he'd already finished his first book, couldn't figure out how to get it published. I hadn't published. I had no idea. I didn't know what Create Space was via Amazon self-publishing, now Kindle Direct. But I just simply meditated on it one night before I went to sleep and said, show us the way. If he's meant to publish this book because he's not attracting an agent or a publisher, what should he do? And the very next morning, I get up, and the first thing in my email is this email from Amazon Create Space. Would you like to self-publish your own book? And I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is. So I forwarded it to him, and then he helped me publish my first book because I was so stuck. I didn't know if I was writing nonfiction or fiction. I'd started so many books in so many subject areas to do with spirituality, to do with reincarnation, past lives, with awakenings, with forgiveness. The same themes were working throughout them, but I couldn't figure out how to get one of them done. So what happened was by this time, he had taken me to my first past life regressions as a client. He found the first therapist that I went to and literally drove me to those sessions. And it was so profound that 2 hours, my first past life regression I had as the client, it changed everything in my life. I went in very type A, very stressed, single mother, MBA, working too many hours, exhausted, too much on my plate, and had no spiritual practice, didn't know how to meditate. And the therapist had been honest with me, and she said, "You're not a great candidate. We're just going to have to see what happens and see if you can relax and get anywhere with it in 2 hours. Are you willing to do that?" And I said, "Absolutely. We're just going to need to look at it as an interesting experiment." And that was the way I was able to release my expectations. So what happened in that session, Wendy, was profound. I not only journeyed back to scenes earlier in this lifetime that were troubling me, and she was able to help me clean those up, but we went back to 2 past lives, and most importantly of all, we released my anxiety. And to not have that like a ball and chain on me anymore, just making me live life small and not be willing to really go for things. I'd never needed medication for it, but I definitely had a lot of anxiety in certain areas. So it was just tremendous. And at the end of that 2-hour past life regression with that wonderful Newton therapist in downtown Seattle, I said to her, "Okay, get out your book, get out your appointment book. I'm ready to schedule my life between lives." And she looked at me and she's like, "Wendy, first of all, I don't know if my books go that far." And because I said, "I want to schedule it for a year from now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do in the interim, but I think I'm going to get some sort of spiritual practice. I think I'm going to just keep doing these things so that I can have a really great LBL." And she wanted me to sign up for a monthly past life regression, which I completely respect, but I was like, it's not going to happen because I do not have the funds to do it, and I'm not going to be able to get a ride into downtown Seattle that many times. This was before Uber and Lyft. And I said, just please, have I not qualified? Because the qualifications on your website for an LBL are 1 successful past life regression. Did I not just do that? She said, "Yes, you blew the doors off. You're amazing. You're very fortunate. You're very, very gifted as a client at moving into that state, even though you didn't know what that state was and you'd never done it before." So it's like, okay, well then get your book out. Sign me up for the LBL. So that's what we did. So a year later, I go back and I have the Life Between Lives, which is a 4-hour spiritual regression. You go to a much deeper level and you go back in utero in this lifetime. You learn why you chose your parents. You learn what you're here to work on. You learn so many things. You learn why you chose your body. So it's just a very deep, profound level. And then you go briefly into a past life simply as a jumping off point to go home to the light, to meet with council of elders, to reunite with your soul family. Perhaps you'll be talking with angels. Perhaps you'll find out what your job is at home. You may get information regarding how you're doing in this life. Does this not sound like an NDE without the trauma of whatever caused the near-death experience? So I had that session. It was so profound when I transcribed the LBL, because I had a recording from it. It was 65 pages of information I had not known. So that was a really big deal, and really started to kick my spiritual awakening into high gear, and really was uplifting and changing my life in wonderful ways. I then worked with a quantum healing hypnotherapy practitioner, because I'd been with the Newton practitioner, and I had 3 past life regressions over the next 2 summers with her, and started to receive a lot of the physical healing that I needed. That was part of why I was drawn to the quantum healing that Dolores Cannon pioneered, because I heard it could help with physical healing, and I needed a lot of it. So that was coming just amazingly. And at the end of that 3rd session, the 3rd quantum healing hypnotherapy session, the therapist said to me, "Wendy, you need to listen to your recording really carefully, because you'll notice you're not only really facile speaking as your higher self and as your guide." She said, "You're telling me what to do. And you're saying to me as the therapist, ask her this, direct her there. She needs more time there. We want her to go back here." She said, "It's like you're playing all the parts and you know how to be the hypnotherapist." And I'm looking at her going, What are you talking about? But when I listened to the recording, she was absolutely right. So at that point, after having those 5 sessions myself as the client over a 3-year period, I knew I'd had so much healing and information and uplifting insight to completely change my life. I wanted to offer this to other people. I thought, gee, I wonder if I can get trained for this and what that would look like. So very quickly, I get introduced to the perfect person, and he was a Canon student over in the UK, and he'd been a hypnotherapist for 20 years. And we trained one-on-one via Skype. It was before Zoom was around. And it was just profound. So that was how I got my initial training for past life regression. And then I went and trained with Dr. Brian Weiss in person. That was magical. So I traveled to the Omega Institute in upstate New York, which is the only place where he does the in-person. So he flies up from Florida. I flew over from Seattle and went and did that training with him. And then I was able to later train with one of Dr. Michael Newton's original first-degree students, and she had been a trainer for the Newton Institute. And that's kind of the big 3 past life regressionists in the U.S., Dolores Cannon and Michael Newton having now passed on. And along the way, and I'm still working full-time. I'm still raising teenagers, taking care of my house, pets. There's still so much going on, trying to write, and so much going on. But these things that were meant to happen, they just flowed in so beautifully, so effortlessly, that I started to realize for the first time in my life, everything didn't have to be hard. And I had never realized that before. And I also learned over time, slowly, because I was not a natural at it, how to spiritually surrender, how to let go of things, how to ask for ease and grace, how to follow the path that was lit up. And things just really started to change. I trained as a Reiki master for energy healing. And I found that was the Japanese term and take on what I'd already been doing intuitively of sending. I was already sending Reiki energy to people from a distance. Every morning I would get up and it's like, okay, which 3 people most need my help? And I would just do it in the morning, standing in my bathroom before I rushed off to work, not knowing what I was doing until I took the Reiki training. It's like, oh, well, now I know the name for that. And I then also, I trained as a channel. because I was really drawn to that. And a spiritual teacher had told me, do you know that you've been a channel many times and you're meant to help others by speaking for the divine and by bringing through accurate messages? And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing, but it kicks off a lot of fear for me. I want to do that really well. I don't want to be half-assed about that. And she then just kind of like heightened it even more. And she said, yeah, you're meant to channel. You have soul contracts with Jesus, with Yeshua ben Joseph, and with Mary Magdalene, and with Mother Mary. And I'm like, oh boy, can I have the obscure river god instead? Was my initial reaction, because it's like, that's really big. I'm honored. That's a privilege, but it took me years to grow into that. So I went and did formal training for that for several years. There's wonderful channels that just do it naturally and never want or need any training, but I chose to go the formal training route with it. And the way I got the first book finally done and published, going back to that point about if a soul contract is meant to happen because of the pieces that click into place, as I said, my former boyfriend and I knew we were meant to write books together, but instead it became me helping get his first published. And my first book became his session with me. And that was such a beautiful turning of the wheel, because here he's the one that introduces me to past life regression, finds my first regressionist for me as the client, drives me to those sessions. And now I've become his past life regressionist. It was about maybe 5 years later at that point into it. And his session, Wendy, was so profound. It became my first book, Regression Healing 1, The Huntsman, The Lord High Mayor, and the World War II Soldier, because he had such a significant physical chronic pain from having been a professional athlete in 2 high-contact sports and also from multiple car collisions. He'd actually broken his neck. So he'd had that surgically repaired, but he had profound physical pain. And what we found during his session was it came from 2 separate past lives where he had been egregiously harmed and had not forgiven the individuals. And that is often the source of physical and emotional pain, is we have not set ourselves free by forgiving everyone involved, including ourselves. So he had started the session, and I asked him, on the pain scale of 0 to 10, no pain to worst pain of your life, where are you on a daily basis? And he said around 7 most days. And he was working so hard to resist taking painkillers. He didn't want to live his life on painkillers. And, he was doing everything right. He massage and acupuncture, and he could just daily exercise. And he was just trying everything. And at the end of the session, because it was past life related, I said, what's your pain level now? And he said, oh my gosh, I can't believe the difference. I can so much more comfortably move not only my neck, but my shoulders, my back, and it's about a 3. And I can just function so much better. So, we stayed in touch for years after that session, and I was, double checking, how are you now? And he's like, it's still workable. It got down that much, that much more. So I wrote that session as my first book, not planning to, because again, I was still like so caught up in my head, caught up in my left brain. What will people think? And I just wasn't getting it done. So before I did his session, my guides kindly told me quite specifically, this is going to be the most difficult session of your life. And there's still so much energy between the 2 of you that you should use 2 different recorders in case one of them gets jammed, because there's so much energy. That's exactly what happened. My MP3, which worked perfectly, didn't record a single word beyond us saying testing to check our 2 volumes. I recorded it on my brand new, at the time, this was like around 2012 or so, my brand new to me, fancy dancy iPhone. And I was like, oh, look, this has a recorder on it. So I had just pushed play, not having used it before, having no idea of how long it would run or not run. Thankfully, the entire session was there. It was a 4.5-hour session.
Oh, wow.
So I've now got this humongo file because it was a new phone. You're using up all the space on it. And I can't get it off the phone to transfer onto his computer, which is what I normally would do with MP3 back in the day before Zoom audio files. So I don't know what to do, because I asked him, I said, how long do you think your session was? He says, oh, we went much longer than I thought, because I know I'm not a great client, because I just keep coming out of the therapeutic level, and I just it's hard for me to do. So, but I knew he was an athlete, so I kept using visualization. I knew most athletes visualize very powerfully. So anyway, I can't get it off my phone, and he thinks the session's 2 hours. It was 4.5 hours. That tells me there's 2.5 hours of info that he didn't know about, but I don't know what it is. And also, he was able to connect with his higher self and guides for the first time. So I really wanted him to have the session recording, but I couldn't just hand off my phone. So I went to the phone store and said, hey, can you get this file off here for me? I want to transfer it to, this email address, or put on a flash drive, or do some brilliant tech thing that you guys know how to do that I don't even know what I'm asking. And they said, the iPhone is not capable of a 4.5-hour recording. I'm like, well, I've got it on here. And you can't listen to it. I'm a therapist, but take my word for it. It's on here. And they're like, yeah, we can see this humongo file. And I'm like, yeah, please don't play this out loud in the mall. And so we can't get it off there. So the only thing I could come up with was I said, oh my goodness, I'm just going to type them a quick and dirty transcript and not worry about, punctuation and quote marks, and just get it down on paper as fast as I can. And I asked him, I said, do you want it as a transcript? He said, oh my God, that would be huge. I can remember this, but then I don't remember how it got there. And so I did that. But Wendy, what was happening was, as I'm doing this on a Saturday, I do it for a couple hours, and I was like, oh, I need a stretch break. And when I came back and looked at it and just kind of went back to the first page, it said the name of the book. It said my name is author. It had table of contents. It had note to myself to add a resource guide at the end on forgiveness. I'm like, oh my God, it's a book. I didn't know that. So I didn't know I had written that, typed that as I was going along. So clearly, my guides were just kind of channeling that in through me. And it was just coming on through. And it became my first book with his, full agreement, and blinded his identity and his full gratitude, because he said, I know we're supposed to write books together, and I just feel like a weight coming off me that this is my way to help you write your book.
Regression Healing 1.
Yes, exactly. And then what led me to the next book, The Flow Plymouth Plantation, was having a lot of experiences with a ghost, which you and I did the separate episode on. And the curveball was that the ghost that I couldn't get to go home to the light turned out to be me, from the past life in colonial America. And I had to write it as a book because there was so much energy to release. And even though I did a lot of meditations and prayer and energy healing sessions with people on it, it had to be written as a book to get the full release. And then something similar happened with my most recent book, and that was an 8-year journey. So Regression Healing 2, Joe and Marilyn, came up because I started back in 2015, 2016. I started sensing Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe around me all the time. And I was like, what is going on? And I mean, I knew who they were. They're so well known. But it's not like I was this big baseball fan. And also, I'm Canadian, and Joe's kind of like before my time, you know, when he was born and when he played, and you know, that sort of thing. So, and Marilyn died in 1962. I mean, I was born in 1961. So, you know, they kind of predated me. But yes, they're simply very well known individuals. So, I just kept having more and more experiences. I could just feel Joe, I could hear Joe, and I could see Marilyn. And my spiritual teacher knew this was going on, and she was sensing it, and she kept asking me questions about it. And she said, you've got some work to do here. And finally, she just texted me one day and said, Joe wants to talk with you. Are you ready? And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just got called to the principal's office.
Yeah.
No, I'm not ready, but yes, I know it's time. So I just went and meditated for half an hour, and what he told me, it was really big. It was a really big deal. It was shocking, but yet it wasn't a surprise, and I knew it was my deepest truth. And what he told me was I had been him in a past parallel life, and that we were the same soul. And I was like, oh boy, Joe, again, can I have the obscure river god? So I texted my teacher back and I said, yeah, I've got it straight who I was in that timeline, and I'm just going to sit on this for a while. And she, you know, responded back right away. I support you with whatever you decide. I completely can see both sides of this coin. So after sitting with it for a couple of weeks, I chose to go have a past life regression. And I chose a friend who I knew was a really gifted QHHT, quantum healing practitioner. I'd never had a session with her before. She was quite a new friend to me. So she knew very little about me. And she didn't follow sports. And that all felt, it was very level-headed. And that just all felt like a perfect fit. So I wrote my questions of what I, you know, wanted to work on and know about in the session, and I just trusted that whatever would come up would be the most important thing. I didn't ask specifically about Joe or about baseball. I had kind of a little innocuous question: was I ever an athlete? You know, that was like all I'd said. We didn't even take that question. We immediately, in the very first session, went deep into Joe's childhood and all kinds of detail. And he uses words that I don't use. And he just talks like a guy. It's just different. And he talked about playing stickball on the sandlots in Northern California where he grew up. I grew up in Quebec. I had to Google sandlot. I didn't know what it was. So it was just really interesting of how that, you know, kind of led to the validity of it for me. So a lot came through, a lot of emotional releases came through, but Wendy, I still struggled with it. I'm like, no, he's just too big for me. You know, what if this is a fantasy? What if I've got it wrong? You know, what do I do with this? Why is this coming through? And the reason it was coming through was there was some real emotional angst to release from that lifetime, as well as physical healing that I needed in this lifetime. And that came through when a gal was referred to me for her to have a past life regression, and she had profound memories as Marilyn. So a young woman in Western Europe, we had never met, and she was referred to me for the session. And I zipped my lip because the session is for the client. It's not for me to gab about, you know, maybe we have this shared past life. That wouldn't have been appropriate at all. So I said nothing. And she had 2 very powerful sessions with me. And she recognized and would talk to me at times with me as her therapist, and other times she would just simply be calling me Joe. And I got really persnickety about it. I'm like, why are you calling me Joe? Joe who? Spell it out. And I would, I don't want to assume anything here. And she's like, you, Joe, you're my husband. You know, you were my boyfriend. You were my lover. We broke up. We were getting married again. And she was kind of like irritated with me, like, why don't you remember? And I was like, I do know those things, but I wanted it to be her memories and her healing session. Mm-hmm. So it was very, very interesting. And because of him, both of them being so well known, my ego would just kind of shrink from it. It was just too much for me. So I ended up having 9 sessions with 9 different therapists. Told none of, over a period of 8 years, and told none of them what was going on, because I didn't want to bias them. I just want to leave it open to the divine, what's meant to come through for you. And it was Joe DiMaggio. It was Joe DiMaggio. It was Joe DiMaggio. And as I said, the emotional release, the big one that came up was I was horrified to have this young lady with the profound Marilyn memories talk about what had gone wrong. Joe and Marilyn were briefly married. They had many different relationships over the 10 or 12 years they knew each other, but they were married for less than a year. So I figured, there's probably a reason for that. Yeah. That's pretty short. Mm-hmm. Especially because they'd known each other for a good amount of time before they got married. And she described her shock, her horror, her pain, her heartbreak, that he hit her. Yeah. And he struck her across the shoulder and kind of the side of the neck one time. And she was filming at the time, so she had to ask makeup to cover it up and to hide it. And she said it just brought up such deep heartbreak and shame for me that I just couldn't trust him anymore. And I ended the marriage. Mm-hmm. And they then, so they divorced. He was heartbroken. He never had another significant relationship for 40 more years of his life, because he lived a good long life, unlike Marilyn, who died in her mid-30s. He was in his mid-80s when he passed on. And what that client said was, I forgive you. I forgive him. And I just burst into tears. It was this incredible, huge emotional release to be forgiven like that. So I'm sure that's why we came back together in those 2 sessions, because most therapists do not have a shared past life in common with the client they're working with. And interestingly, all 3 of my books have been about that exact scenario, simply because there was the most energy there to release.
The thing about this too is the fact that they are so public and well known. You know, the drama, the stuff with Joe DiMaggio. He wasn't a happy camper. I mean, this is right. When you read some of the stuff about him that says this guy had some issues, and yes, he was abusive with her. And the other stuff that comes through too, though, that you did talk her through that end of life point for her, where there were other people. That's also fascinating. I'm not going to get into it because that's what the book is for. That's also another interesting aspect of this past life perspective.
Thank you, Wendy. I thought it was so interesting that Joe DiMaggio, has a very different take on what caused her death than she did. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But it's all throughout the book. There are 2 different viewpoints. But isn't that human? Mm-hmm. Because you can have 2 people. You can have a husband and wife spend this amazing, wonderful day together. And if you ask them about it at the end of the day, they'll tell you such different stories.
Well, the other thing was the circles that those 2 travel in. his connections behind the scenes, his personal
Yes.
social connections, not necessarily
Yes.
public, and her social connections, not necessarily public, both alluded to when you get into reading the biographies and do the background, and you can see the parallels of there's other stuff going on where there might have been some other people that were a little questionable around both of them.
Absolutely. Things as simple as her dog's name. I had the client really spell that out because, again, I didn't want to assume anything. So I wanted it to be her healing experience. It was a big decision. It took me, as I said, 8 years to choose that it was time to step to the plate, pun intended, and go ahead and share this book because it came to me in a dream and it was so specific. And I'm working on my next 2 books. I thought it was going to be 1. It's actually going to be 2. And again, it was a dream and it was very specific. And Mary Magdalene came in and she was practically shouting all in capitals, "The time is now, the time is now, the time is now." I was like, okay, I don't need a dream interpreter for this one. You'd like your next 2 books written. So that's what changed things for me in so many ways, from just being this conservative MBA with, really not much of a belief in spirituality or energy, and just really not experiencing a family, no interest in it, still no interest in it, and just to need to step to the plate for my own physical and emotional healing, and to also be able to provide that to others.
Well, and when you work with a very public persona and saying, well, I'm dealing with these people, and Joe continues to advise you or check in on your therapy sessions, that's where it gets a little bit more challenging because you're owning this. And that's where you said 8 years.
A guide. Yes, because he's become a guide. So it just really continues to be incredibly amazing and interesting. And at this point, I really feel it is a privilege. But it took a lot of personal growth on my part to get to that place.
Well, and if you go at it from the higher aspect, the higher self, then we are different on that plane. Like when you were saying the higher self during your near-death experience of a friend who was still very much alive and appeared during your NDE. Well, that's a whole different, that's another 4-hour conversation. So let's just,
I was going to say, that opens a whole other rabbit hole, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So, but there you go. There's book number 6.
Right.
Okay. You take clients. And so I'd like you to just, just what's coming up and give people the next step if they're interested in doing this for themselves.
Absolutely. So please visit my website, which is my full name. It's wendyrosewilliams.com. And there you will find an invitation to join me to work together one-on-one. You'll also get a series of 3 energy healing sessions, which includes past life regression. And you'll also find an invitation to a complimentary group energy healing. It's a 45-minute Zoom call. I offer those once a month or so. I've also got a couple fun new events, including a Come As You Were past life regression party, where I'll help people figure out who they were and release that energy, celebrate that energy, learn from that energy, whatever is most appropriate. And I'm also doing a group event, and these group events are just $10. So it's really a fun way to just kind of try things out together. And what the other one is, it's a live channeling, and sometimes it's with Yeshua, Magdalene, Mother Mary. I've done one of those, and the next one is going to be any ascended master or angel, because Saint Germain and Archangel Michael came in after the last one, and they said, "Why was it limited to those 3?" I was like, okay. That's the best way to reach me. I also have a podcast, which is called Waking Up Spiritually, and you can find it at wakingupspiritually.com or on YouTube or on podcast apps.
Yeah, you have a lot of ways to reach you. Also on your website, testimonials, so people who want more information about that can check that out. Great website, lots of information. And again, this newest book, the one with Joe and Marilyn, it's fascinating, the kind of energy that comes through and the fact that she showed up and here you are going on your path, connecting with Joe DiMaggio, and then the Marilyn Monroe aspect. That's what's just mind-blowing.
It really is, how things align. I just thank God and thank our guides that they're always, and our higher selves, just always working to put things together for us so well. I think the biggest decision we can make in life, Wendy, is, do we believe that the universe always has our back? Or do we feel, are we, in that victim-y place of, it never works out for me, or everybody's out to get me? And we've got to lift up from that and be the powerful creators and co-creators that we're meant to be.
For me, what I do is I look at this as an archetype of each of them. They're the masculine, the feminine. And so if you have difficulty saying, well, this name is, I can't do that because it's completely impossible, look at it from a different perspective and say, these are roles and these are characters in a scene, and each one brings a different dynamic. One is a power hitter. The other one is a mega star. And you're looking at that from what they would bring in terms of the characteristics that are positives and negatives, and you're working them through and bringing them into a manifest plane that says, here, this is how this plays out. So it doesn't mean that it's, cookie cutter exactly the people, because this is again, a work in progress and processing the information on a different level. But I think it's fascinating, the stories that you two came up with these characters that really dovetail into our awareness of the public personas that we saw during their lifetime or that we read about.
Thank you.
So
I so appreciate that, Wendy. I so appreciate what you do. You're just such a fantastic interviewer and just such a bright mind at how you look at these things with your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Your dog has been in the background. So what is your dog's name?
Her name is Henley. So I am a lifetime fan of the Eagles band. So I named her for John Henley, the co-founder of the Eagles band.
Okay. Well, she's been doing cameos in the background, so I want to give her credit for chiming in. Links are in the description for the show. Thanks for listening.